There we go. Well, first.
Now streaming live.
Yeah, let's see if that's true. I'll know in about 3 seconds. Three,
Let's see.
2, 1, and it is working.
Who's that?
That's
Okay. That is our speaker today.
Speaker.
We can hear
Oh, that's the
you.
speaker.
Here we go. Let me help you out there. All right, there. Oh, and there's our speaker. Wonderful. Hello, Seth Keeble. I'm just going to do a spotlight for you a second. How you doing? Okay, and let's see. I actually think I have the ability to unmute myself. Yes, I can. Let me double check. I'm going to just double check something here. Mute, unmute, mute. Yep, I can do it myself, so you don't have to touch anything. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Delighted to be here.
Good. We're not starting. This is
lovely.
just me. This is just schmoozing time. Okay, so I'm just.
Gotcha.
You look good. I like the whole setup.
Thanks. Yeah, we've learned to adapt here, and
We all do.
as my kids like to say, that during the pandemic, they've brought me from about maybe about 2007 technologically to about maybe 2014 or so now.
Right. We're not in 2020 yet, but we're
Yeah.
we're catching up.
Yeah.
Quickly. It's now the grandparents teach the grandchildren how to use Zoom because they only use their phones. Yeah, so that's cute. So yeah, we still have a minute till we begin officially. I'm just practicing with the streaming and let's see, and the recording and the sound. I know you did a sound check already, so I'm not worried.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to get your full time. It is 12 o'clock. I'm just going to double check. I'm going to go to gallery view for a second here and see if anyone else is signing on. And then I will do my official beginning. Okay, very nice. Okay. And now let me go back to speaker view. If you are new to Zoom, God bless you. It's been 9 months. But if you are new to Zoom, you want to be in speaker view. If you're in speaker view, you may see a big me and a big Seth. And if you have an old Zoom, you might only see me, but I'll remove myself so you can see the speaker as well. If you see lots of squares, if you see 55 squares on your screen, you're in gallery view. You may want to move to speaker view. I cannot control that. It's something you have to do. There is a view button on the top of many of our screens that says view. It might be a grid. It might be a big square with 3 dots. You press that and go to speaker view. It'll be better. Seth, I understand you're going to screen share sometimes too. So I'm going to give you all those controls. I am going to mute everyone else up. So this way they don't by accident come on in. And I will leave the chat on as long as people behave. All right. But if it starts distracting you or me, I can always turn it to host only. I get easily distracted. I'm off my medication. So we are going to get started. It is 12:01. It is going to be my honor to introduce you. If this was not a pandemic, you would have had a delicious lunch for $6, but we would pay for you. A $6 lunch at 11:30 and at 12 o'clock. 11:50, I give a 10-minute speech. And then at 12 o'clock, I introduce you. It is 12:01, so it is my honor. Here it goes. This is the official welcome. Welcome to First Mondays. Monday, January 4th, 12 to 1 p.m. First Mondays are coordinated by Sharon Moskowitz and Bernice Nadelson. Today's guest, Seth Keeble. Am I pronouncing that right?
That's close. It's Keibel.
Keibel. Thank
go.
you.
Like libel.
That's very cute. Seth Keibel is a woodwind specialist who plays flute, clarinet, and saxophone. Will punctuate his lecture with musical selections. Klezmer, which literally means tool of song in Yiddish, is the secular folk music of the Jews of Central and Eastern Europe. In the first decades of the 1900s, this music flourished, not only in the old world, but also in the new. In the immigrant community of New York City, the sounds of the European Fiddler on the Roof mixed with the sounds of early jazz and Tin Pan Alley. The result was a quintessentially American sound. This presentation will trace the history and evolution of this music. I'm giving it all away, from the old world to the new, up until the present day and the modern klezmer revival. Vintage audio clips and live performances from Seth will make this program as exciting as music itself. Oh, that's a lot to live up to. Klezmer, American music. It is my honor to welcome you to Bethel's First Mondays program. We get a pretty good crowd on a Monday afternoon, and we are honored to have you here today. Seth Keibel, welcome. And I'm going to mute everyone. So give me 1 second. This way it will go better for us. Mute, do not allow, unmute you. And you are unmuted already. You're good. Okay. You are at 2019.
There you go. Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Alex. Well, thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Alex, and thank you, Bernice Nadelson, Sharon Moskowitz, Chris Benton, everyone else who enabled me to be beamed into your homes on this Monday afternoon, all the way from Baltimore, Maryland. Look, I'm going to do a lot of talking and a lot of yakking, but I always like to get these programs started with just a little bit of music to set the mood and get my juices flowing as well. So,
Wow.
all right. Oh, thank you, and thank you for your virtual applause. I do so thrive off it. Okay, welcome. Welcome. It is great to be here at the Bethel congregation of the South Hills in Pittsburgh. My first time here. It looks suspiciously like my basement. Nonetheless, let me quickly review kind of how this is all going to work. I know Rabbi Alex talked about it as well. Due to the sheer numbers involved, we all must mercilessly, cruelly keep you muted. Rabbi Alex may tell you that it pains him to do so, but secretly he told me it actually gives him great joy and pleasure. Nonetheless, I fully encourage you to avail yourself of Zoom's group chat feature. I know you know how this works. You've done it before, but depending on your device, it varies. You scroll to the top or bottom of your screen with your cursor, your finger, a little menu bar pops up. Smack dab in the middle of the menu bar is a button that says chat. Click on it, that chat window pops up. You go over there, you can clickety-clack any questions, comments, quandaries, conundrums, conniptions you like in there. Now, I may not see it in real time, but I promise at several points during today's presentation, I will go over to that chat window and do my best to address everything contained there within. Okay, I opened with a traditional klezmer melody, one of these songs that goes back hundreds of years. Who knows who first wrote it? That great Jewish composer Anonymous, or Anonymous-Steen. Anyway, that was entitled A Nacht in Gan Eden, which translated from the Yiddish into English means a night in the Garden of Eden, which is actually pretty apropos, because my understanding, and perhaps Rabbi Alex can back me up on this, is that the great Talmudic rabbis of yore actually wrote that the Garden of Eden, as described in the book of Genesis, wasn't so much a literal physical location as it was a Zoom group meeting.
It's Bethel. Bethel is the Garden of Eden, yes.
There you go. Okay. All right. So any discussion of klezmer must first inevitably begin with the word itself. What does it mean? Well, the first thing we want to delve into is the etymology is words, entomology is bugs, I believe. So let's go with etymology of the word itself. Now, klezmer, as we'll talk about, is a Yiddish word, but its etymology, its origins, come from two Hebrew words. Now, Hebrew, as you may know, is a relatively small language. You know, every word in Hebrew has like 6 or 7 different meanings. So the two Hebrew words are clay and zemer. Of course, I have them in transliteration here. So what does clay mean? Well, clay has a lot of meanings in Hebrew. It means instrument, tool, vessel, device, a medium for accomplishing a task. And zemer, much more simply, is music and song. Two Hebrew words, clay, zemer, clay, zemer, clay, klezmer. Put them together, you get the Yiddish word klezmer. And indeed, the original meaning of the word klezmer in Yiddish referred not to a genre of music, not a style like we talk about, you know, classical or bluegrass or jazz or what have you. No, the klezmer was the musicians themselves, the itinerant Eastern European Jewish musician of shtetl or village life was a klezmer, regardless of the repertoire they played, you know, whether it was the kind of music we today call klezmer or other types of music. And of course, one of the beauties of Yiddish is that every word in Yiddish is not easily translatable in English. And indeed, klezmer is one of those words because it actually had just a little bit of a negative connotation. A klezmer was not a serious, respectable musician. People ascribe to these klezmers, or klezmorim, as the Yiddish plural would have it, some of the same negative stereotypes that people have about us musicians to this very day, that of course are completely untrue. That we're unreliable, you know, argumentative, gamblers, you know, shickers, we drink too much. You know, you might be perfectly happy having your daughter grow up and marry a musician in the old country, someone who played in one of the Tsar's military bands, or someone who attended one of the conservatories that admitted Jews, like the ones in Odessa and Kiev. But you wouldn't want your daughter to marry a klezmer. A klezmer was someone who couldn't be counted upon to provide for a family, who didn't know where their next meal was coming from. Of course, I'm not trying to be sexist when I say wouldn't want your daughter to marry a klezmer, because of course in the old country, this profession, like almost everything else, was strictly 110% male. Of course, that, along with so many other things, will change in the journey across the Atlantic Ocean. All right, so that's the original meaning of the word, the musicians themselves. And it's only really in the modern klezmer that is the resurgence of interest in this music from about the mid-1970s to the present day, that people have now taken this old word, which used to refer to the musicians themselves, and now use it to refer to a body of work, a genre, a style of music. So herein lies some of the confusions. And to this day, I mean, if you grab a group of 20 klezmer musicians, put them in a room, and ask them to define klezmer, you're probably going to get 25 answers, a few arguments, maybe a fist fight or two. So let me give you a brief synopsis to this. We kind of have a dichotomy, almost a schism, if you will, where the academians, the ethnomusicologists who study this music, have derived a very specific and precise definition for klezmer. Now, they've derived this definition based on the circumstances in which this music was played in the old country before the modern era, meaning roughly before the start of the 20th century. They do not base this definition on the way this music was played in the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the early decades of the 20th century, and they certainly don't base this definition on the way this music is played today. So let's start with that very precise, narrow, academic definition, and I'll talk about this clause by clause. Secular, instrumental, Eastern European, Jewish folk music. Secular, instrumental, Eastern European, Jewish folk music. Let me go through this clause by clause. Secular, not religious. Because indeed, in the old country, these musicians did not play in religious custom, ceremony, worship, what have you, for understandable reasons. I mean, first of all, again, I'm not an expert on it, but I believe the rabbis of yore decreed that until the temple was rebuilt in Jerusalem, you couldn't have instruments used in worship of the Lord, only the human voice, a cappella vocals. And of course, that's true in Orthodox congregations to this day. And we know from many written oral accounts that sometimes the rabbinical authorities didn't look too kindly on these klezmer musicians, perhaps because of some of those perceived lifestyle issues I mentioned earlier. Now, someone may be about to just, type into the chat window furiously. I see Rabbi Alex is one step ahead of me, and say, wait a minute, what about the wedding? Didn't these musicians play for weddings? Isn't that inherently a religious setting? Well, yes and no. It's true. One of the primary venues for this music in every era of its history is the Jewish wedding. But in the old country, these musicians played strictly for the secular aspects of the wedding. They didn't play for any of the religious components. Again, today, these things aren't necessarily true. A lot of times when I'm hired for a wedding, I will play for the ceremony as well as the reception. That's a religious component. Back then, not. Okay, secular, instrumental, with instruments, not with the human voice. As you may know, there is a rich tradition in Eastern Europe of both Yiddish folk song and Yiddish theater. But in the old country, these are separate disciplines, separate traditions, different people working completely independent of each other. These klezmer musicians did not sing, they did not work with vocalists. Now again, Lower East Side of Manhattan, these lines start to blur a lot, and today they're extremely blurry. I'll get to that more in a minute. Secular, instrumental, Eastern European is pretty self-explanatory. The area commonly known as the Pale of Settlement. Present-day Ukraine, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Czech Republic, Slovakia, what have you. I've been told from some people that should be amended to say Central and Eastern European. I guess a lot of the folks from the former Soviet republics don't like the term Eastern Europe because that conjures up images of the Warsaw Pact era. They much prefer Central Europe. That's fine. Okay. Central and Eastern European. Jewish is self-explanatory. Folk music. Music that is handed down orally, A-U-R-A-L-L-Y, from generation to generation, and music that is strictly functional. This is very important. This is music that was always utilitarian. It served a purpose. It was for dancing. It was for background. It was for partying. It was for some custom or something. But it was never music that was being made for its own intrinsic artistic value. And I talk a lot about a lot of anachronisms of the klezmer revival, ways in which the modern incarnation of this music does not accurately reflect a previous period in its history. Now, I don't mean these to sound like criticisms. A lot of these anachronisms are improvements, I think. But one of these anachronisms is the thing that I do fairly often, or at least used to do fairly often, before about 10 months or so ago, a klezmer concert, where people sit and listen and give me their undivided attention and clap, hopefully, after each song. That never happened. That is a manifestation of the modern klezmer revival. Okay, so that's the narrow academic definition of klezmer. But today, in 2021, in the United States, you'd be hard-pressed to find a single klezmer band anywhere that limits themselves to secular, instrumental, Eastern European Jewish folk music. Klezmer bands in the klezmer revival over the last several decades have cast a much wider net for repertoire. And indeed, klezmer bands today do perform vocal material like Yiddish folk songs, like Eufen Pripitchik and Rosenkiss mit Mandolin, Raisins and Almonds. Klezmer bands do perform songs from the Yiddish theater, like Romania, Romania, and By Mir Bist Du Schön. My goodness, there's not a klezmer band in the world that doesn't play By Mir Bist Du Schön. I think it's required by law. These are all songs that don't meet that narrow definition of klezmer. The academics would say, no, that's not klezmer. But today, klezmer bands incorporate much of this repertoire. Israeli dance tunes, even Hebrew melodies. Lots of different stuff, and klezmer has almost become sort of a catch-all umbrella term for the entirety of the Ashkenazi, Eastern European musical tradition. Sephardic music, of course, is its own completely separate, wonderful musical ball of wax. We're not going to go there today. So in practical usage, the word klezmer has become a much broader term based on what klezmer bands today actively perform, concertize, record, etc. If a klezmer band plays it, it must be klezmer. Now, a lot of klezmer bands play YMCA. I'm not trying to argue that that's klezmer, but I think you get my drift. Okay. The next thing I'd like to do in this little vignette approach I'm taking is to take us into a time machine. Now, I'm being only halfway glib when I say this, because what we're about to do is truly the closest thing to a time machine that we have. And when I do this in classes and lectures, every single time I get goose pimples. Let me explain. We're going to listen to one of the earliest recordings of this music played in the old country. Now, this is a recording from 1908 in Bucharest, Romania. And this is a recording made on wax cylinder. Now, let's talk about this a bit. Wax cylinder was an early form of recording technology developed by Thomas Edison, or at least developed by someone who worked for Thomas Edison, that was literally a cylinder, not a disc, a cylinder of wax on which a few minutes of music could be recorded. Now, the only people using wax cylinder technology at the dawn of the 20th century fit into two categories. Technologists like Edison, who were experimenting with the technology, and a few far-sighted musicologists, music historians, who saw in this new technology a unique window of opportunity to record traditional and ethnic folk music before it was tainted, if you will, by Western or modern influences. A most famous example would be Bela Bartok, who went out into the Hungarian countryside and made hundreds of wax cylinder recordings of traditional Hungarian, not Jewish, music. And Bela Bartok would speak very explicitly about how he felt he was in a race against time, getting to these small towns and villages to record this music before modern influences encroached and you couldn't separate the traditional from the modern. Now, I mention this because not only is it probable, it is almost a certainty that the musicians you're about to hear had no idea what was going on. This is the part that gives me goose pimples. They're in their town, in this case, Bucharest, Romania. Some stranger comes into town with this bizarre contraption, points to the giant horn, and says, "Play into here." The idea that what they were playing in that moment 113, I think if I'm doing my math right, 113 years ago, could be listened to 113 years later over the interwebs in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, would have literally blown their minds. This is the part that gives me goose pimples. This is the part that makes me feel voyeuristic. These musicians had no idea what was going on. This is not a recording being made for sale and profit. So the recording we're going to listen to is, like I said, 1908. It's a tune called My Office, which translates roughly as How Beautiful. Of course, one of the problems with klezmer as a folk tradition is there's a lot of inconsistency in the nomenclature. You know, one song can have a bunch of different titles. The same title can apply to a lot of different songs. So some of you may even recognize this song. It's not uncommon in klezmer repertoires today. These days, it's more oftenly known under the title of Tanz Tanz Yiddela, or Dance Little Jews. And I take that very personally as a little Jew myself. But here it's called My Office, Belfast Romanian Orchestra, Bucharest, Romania, 1908. And you know, I actually had someone ask me during one of these classes, oh, do you have like a wax cylinder machine hooked up to your computer? No, these have all been reissued and put out on CD and online and all that. I do not have a wax cylinder machine with a USB port. So let me quickly take a quick scroll through the group chat. Oh my goodness, me in person in Baltimore with Daryl Davis. Daryl's one of my closest friends in the world. If you guys aren't familiar with Daryl Davis, I mean, Rabbi Alex, you should bring Daryl Davis in for a talk. He's incredible. Daryl Davis is a boogie-woogie pianist, incredible pianist. He played with Chuck Berry as Chuck Berry's pianist the last couple of decades, all these other people. I played with him for years. But then he has this whole second life in race relations. He is a black man, and he spends a lot of time going to Klan rallies and meeting with Klan members, and he has like 30 Klan members' robes in his house of Klan members he has gotten to quit the Klan because of his reaching out. He's a fascinating person. If you Google him, you'll find him. He's one of my closest friends, an amazing individual, Daryl Davis. So that's awesome. Let's see. Klezmatics use Yes, a lot of bands today do use vocalists, even though that doesn't meet that traditional old world definition of klezmer. Okay, so let's move on. Between the years 1880 and 1924, over 2.5 million Jews traveled across the Atlantic Ocean and settled in the New World, primarily in the New York metropolitan area, because New York is the center of the known universe. And what happened to this music in the journey across the Atlantic Ocean? Well, actually, initially, there wasn't much change. I mean, people were in a very strange and unfamiliar land, new language, new customs, new economy. They want something familiar and comforting to remind them of home. So initially, those Jewish musicians who made the journey across the Atlantic Ocean basically recreate in the Lower East Side of Manhattan the same music they played in the shtetls of the old country. But pretty soon, changes do start to creep into music for a lot of practical reasons. The changing nature of a Jewish wedding and whatnot. I won't get into that here, but the most important catalyst for change in this music in the New World is that the economics of being a klezmer musician are diametrically different in New York than they were in the old country. You know, in the old country, there was almost no economic competition between musicians in the world of klezmer. Almost no competition between musicians because this music, like everything else in Eastern European Jewish life, was a family profession. When you were born into a family band, a kapella, as the Yiddish word would have it, you had a gig for life. You weren't going to leave your own family band and join someone else's family band. You weren't going to be fired from your own family. I mean, I'm sure there were occasional examples of that, but that would be pretty extreme. As a result, it didn't really matter whether you were virtuosic on your instrument or not. If you were completely talentless, but born into one of these musical families, you had a gig for life, and you would make just as much money as your virtuoso cousin Moishe, even though you were a complete schlub on your instrument. Furthermore, there's almost no competition between bands. Many shtetls might have only one kapella, one band. If you needed music for your wedding, you either hired them or you didn't. There was no other option. You couldn't get your cousin with an iPod or a DJ or something to spin tunes. As a result, there's no competition between musicians, no competition between bands. There is almost no correlation in the old world between musical ability and income. The only real incentive for musical self-improvement is self-satisfaction, which I'm sure was, plenty for many. Now, don't mistake me. I'm not trying to say that all the musicians in the old country were lousy. That's not true. But they were a mixed bag. It is true that in the old country, you could be a talentless schlub, be born into one of these family bands, and have a gig for life. Well, in New York, this all disappears almost overnight. First of all, the family structure of these bands disintegrates almost immediately for understandable reasons. As you know, families simply don't come to this country en masse. They come in dribs and drabs. One person comes one year, the next year they send for someone else, next year maybe they send for someone else. Some people never make the journey. As a result, it's impossible to maintain the family structure of these bands. Well, this is incredibly liberating for Jewish band leaders. For the first time in the history of this music, Jewish band leaders can hire exactly what and who they want. In the old country, instrumentation was largely based on women's fertility. The more male children in a family band, the larger the family band. And as each child came of age, they obtained whatever instrument was already in the family or could be easily and cheaply obtained. So the instrumentation tended to be rather haphazard. Well, now in New York, Jewish band leaders can hire whatever they want. If they want 3 tubas, a piccolo, and a glockenspiel, that's what they hire. More importantly, they're now able to hire the best musicians at their disposal. They're no longer really obligated to use their talentless cousin Shmuel. They can hire the best musicians they can. And of course, now every band competes with every other band for every gig in the shtetl of New York. So almost overnight, you go from virtually no competition in the world of klezmer to it becoming fiercely competitive. By the way, the record business in New York further fuels this fierce sense of economic competition, as now records are being made for sale and profit by the quote-unquote Jewish divisions of all the major record companies at the time. Almost overnight, this leads to a tremendous rise in the level of musicianship. As for the first time in the history of this music, there is a direct correlation between musical ability and how much money you make, your ability to feed your family. And the better you get at your instrument, the more you'll work. And if you are a talentless schlub, you don't work, and you need to find another profession. This gives rise to a tremendous rise in the level of musicianship in a very short amount of time, which leads to the emergence of the klezmer superstars, if you will. Certain instrumentalists of this music who really become bona fide celebrities in the Jewish immigrant community of New York in the early decades of the 20th century. Most infamous among these klezmer celebrities is the clarinetist Naftuli Brandwein. Now let's talk about Naftuli Brandwein, and I'll give you a taste of his music. Naftuli Brandwein was from, he was a Galicianer. He was from Polish Galicia, came to this country when he was around 19 years old, and very quickly made a name for himself as the preeminent soloist of this music on the clarinet, of course. By the way, to this day, musicians have really heated arguments over which is the more important instrument in klezmer, the clarinet or the violin. You folks all look very well educated, so you obviously know it's the clarinet. Anyway, Naftuli Brandwein quickly makes a name for himself as a preeminent soloist of this music. Now, one of the things I love about Naftuli Brandwein is his musical personality. The way he played the clarinet was reflective of his real-world personality, who he was as an individual. Honestly, that's the hallmark of almost any great musician. So what kind of person was Naftuli Brandwein? Well, he was the living, breathing embodiment of all those negative stereotypes I mentioned earlier about musicians. Indeed, Naftuli Brandwein was argumentative, unreliable, irresponsible, a gambler, card player, a womanizer, a shicker, a drunk. There have often been rumors, unsubstantiated, but I love spreading unsubstantiated rumors, that he had ties to Murder, Inc., the Russian Jewish mafia, and perhaps most importantly for our story, a raving egomaniac. The stories about Naftuli Brandwein are the stuff of legend. I mean, back when it was kind of a brand new thing, he had a neon sign made up that said Naftuli Brandwein Orchestra, and he used to wear it around his neck while he played. Now, I don't think you fully understand the chutzpah involved with this. For reasons that'll become apparent, there was never any such group as the Naftuli Brandwein Orchestra. Naftuli didn't have the wherewithal to be a band leader. No, he would be hired by other band leaders to be their star soloist. So he'd be showing up to other people's gigs wearing the neon sign that said Naftuli Brandwein Orchestra. Because as far as he was concerned, if he was playing, it was his orchestra. We're told many times he'd be playing clarinet and he'd be drinking and he'd loosen his belt and he'd drink and loosen his belt, and many times his pants would fall clean down and he'd keep on playing. Years before Miles Davis made it famous, he used to play with his back to the audience if he spotted another clarinetist in the audience so they couldn't steal his fingerings. We're told that when these bands used to go up to the Catskills for a weekend or a week in the summer, they used to all draw straws who had to see who had to bunk with Naftuli, partially because no one liked him, and partially because he had a reputation for, and I swear I'm not making this up, tremendous flatulence. There's one story in particular about Naftuli Brandwein that is very famous. Now, I caution you, no one has been able to nail down the specific year or location that this story transpired. So it's possible that this story has been embellished or is somewhat apocryphal, but it's almost too bizarre a story to be completely made up out of thin air. And it has been told by generations of klezmer musicians. The story goes something like this. Naftuli Brandwein was hired for a particular engagement, probably a wedding, that happened to fall on July 4th. So being the patriotic immigrant he was, he decided to show up for this engagement dressed as Uncle Sam. He got himself an Uncle Sam costume. But I guess he thought he wouldn't stand out enough dressed as Uncle Sam. So he also bought himself some Christmas lights. And he wrapped himself in Christmas lights and plugged himself in. So try to picture him now. He's playing clarinet, dressed as Uncle Sam, wrapped in Christmas lights. Well, all is well and good, but he's playing, he's drinking, he's schwitzing, sweating. He's playing, he's drinking, he's schwitzing. And sure enough, the story goes, at some point during the course of the engagement, he reached a critical mass of sweat to short-circuit the entire establishment and nearly electrocute himself in the process. All right, musically, Naftuli played like the type of person he was. His style of klezmer clarinet was very melodramatic, very over the top. All those kind of inflections, almost cantorial inflections we associate with klezmer, the trills, the grace notes, the krecht or crying, the schmears. No, we're not going there yet. He does those in a tremendous amount. His style of klezmer clarinet is very melodramatic, highly ornamented, over the top, and he plays like the egomaniac he is. I mean, one of the famous things about Naftuli is, to the best of our knowledge, and certainly in every recording, he never played a single note of accompaniment his entire life. There is one center of attention in every Naftuli Brandwein recording and performance from beginning to end, and that's Naftuli. In fact, those of you who are somewhat musically disinclined may notice that there almost seems to be a disconnect between Naftuli and the rest of the band. I mean, it almost sounds like Naftuli isn't really listening to the other musicians. Well, he wasn't. He made no secret of it. He would say it wasn't his job to listen to them, it was their job to listen to him. So a Naftuli Brandwein recording tends to sound a little bit like Naftuli up here and the band behind him just frantically trying to keep up. All right, the recording, oh, I should show you a photo. Hold on one second. Sorry. There he is, Naftuli. Okay, the recording I have chosen to play for you from Naftuli Brandwein is one made in December 1922. This is called Freit sich Yidelach, or Be Happy Jews. Oops, give me 1 second while I get this queued up. All righty. Let's see. There was a good comment. Maria commented in the chat that the melodies sound like they came from the Middle East originally. The rhythms sound more Western. Look, you're pretty on the mark. I mean, when people ask me to give a musical description of klezmer, it's a slight oversimplification, but I sometimes say that it reflects the path of the diaspora, meaning you start with Middle Eastern scales and modes, Middle Eastern sounds. You know, these are scales that are found in lots of Middle Eastern music. You find them in Arabic music. You know, all right, look, there's a lot more to the musical world than just major and minor. There are scales that if Bach had heard, he would have keeled over right in his organ bench. And look, that scale is a good example of it. Now that scale in Jewish music is generally called Ahava Rabbah, or boundless love. In Arabic music, it's called Hijaz, which I don't know what that means. But it's the same exact scale, different music, which brings to mind something I always like to say. If musicians ran the world, there'd be no wars. Nothing would ever get done. But there'd be no wars, so at least that's a net gain. Anyway, you take those Middle Eastern sounds, take them north and superimpose them over non-Jewish Eastern European dance rhythms, like your basic sort of polka rhythm. And you end up with klezmer. It's a slight oversimplification, but it's not that far from the truth. Okay, with the time I have left, I want to talk about a song that best represents the intersection between Jewish and American music in this country. It's a very famous song. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. It was a huge hit in 1937 for the Andrews Sisters. I'm talking about The Bear Missed the Train. No. Another Beer, Mr. Shane. No, that's not right. By Mir Bistu Shane. Okay, before I launch into the story, let me just say this. There are some differing accounts out there of how this all went down. There are some slight variations in the story. Some people have different events in a different order, dollar amounts different. What I'm about to offer to you is the best consensus version of this story that I've been able to come up with. But it is possible in your own educational explorations, you may encounter some variations in this story. Do keep in mind that sometimes some of the people offering these variations have a vested interest in doing so. Okay. Our story begins in 1932. By Mir Bistu Shane is originally composed by the great composer of the Yiddish theater, Sholom Sekunda, for a Yiddish theater production on 2nd Avenue in the Lower East Side called I Would If I Could. It's sung by the great star of the Yiddish theater, Aaron Lebedeff, with all Yiddish lyrics from Sholom Sekunda's songwriting partner, Jake Jacobs. You know, the English lyrics that we all know are not a direct translation of the original Yiddish lyrics. Same idea, same sentiments, not direct translation. Okay. In the audience at one of the productions of I Would If I Could is a black vaudeville duo named Johnny and George. They like to go to the Yiddish theater. They find it entertaining. Well, actually, they had an ulterior motive. You see, Johnny and George were a vaudeville duo. And as you well know, when you're in vaudeville, you need shtick, you need gimmicks. Well, one of their gimmicks was that they sang songs in lots of different languages. So they had decided at some point, you know, we should learn a song in Yiddish. So this black vaudeville duo was going to the Yiddish theater to find the right song to incorporate in their repertoire. They hear this song, they say, that's it. They go backstage, talk to Sholom Sekunda, he gives them the thumbs up, and they learn this song all in Yiddish. Now, Johnny and George perform all over the place, but one of their most frequent venues, of course, is the Apollo Theater in Harlem. So fast forward now to the spring of 1936. They're performing this song all in Yiddish at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. But who else happens to be in the audience at one of the performances? Sammy Cahn, originally born as Samuel Cohen, the white Jewish Tin Pan Alley songwriter. Now, Sammy Kahn hears them sing the song all in Yiddish, and he says, "Oi, where did this come from?" So he goes backstage, talks to Johnny and George, and they direct him to Sholem Secunda in the Yiddish Theater District. Sammy Kahn tracks down Sholem Secunda and purchases the rights to Buy Me Your Bist Duchesne from him for $50. Now, this is the point in the story where I have to pause a bit. To this day, Sammy Kahn gets a very bad rap in this story. People talk and write about how he swindled Sholem Secunda out of this song, and he's often painted in quite a villainous light. And I want to push back against that just a little bit. It is definitely true, with the benefit of hindsight, it was a lousy deal. And Sammy Kahn would end up making a mountain of cash off this song, and it does seem somewhat unfair that Sholem Secunda only made $50 off this song and not a penny more. And perhaps if Sammy Kahn had been more of a mensch, he would have given some more money to Sholem Secunda or bought him a car or sent flowers or something. He never did. But I want to point out two things. First of all, as you well know, in 1936, $50 went a lot further than it does today. I mean, it was a decent amount of money. Today, $50 barely pays for all our streaming services on a monthly basis. Doesn't even really. Okay, but more importantly than that, remember that no one, not Sammy Kahn, not Sholem Secunda, not anyone, could have possibly imagined in 1936 that a song from the Yiddish theater would become a worldwide mega hit. That would have been beyond their comprehension. And the fact of the matter is, if you were a songwriter in the Yiddish theater in 1936, and someone wanted to buy a song from you for $50, you'd be a fool to say no. So while it is a lousy deal with the vantage of history, it's a little unfair, I think, to characterize Sammy Kahn as having swindled Sholem Secunda out of his song. And indeed, Sholem Secunda's heirs to this day will tell that to anyone who listens. Now look, if my grandfather or great-grandfather had sold one of the biggest selling songs in music history for $50, I'd probably say the same thing as well. Anyway, back to our story. Sammy Kahn wears many different hats in the music business, but one of the hats he wears at this time is as an A&R man, artist and repertoire, basically a record producer for Decca Records, one of the big record companies in New York. And he's been tasked with producing a trio of as of yet unknown singing sisters, not Jewish, from Minnesota with the last name of Andrews, the Andrews Sisters. And he decides to have them record this song, all in Yiddish. The higher-ups at Decca Records hear about this, call him into their office and say, "Are you out of your mind? You can't have them record this song in Yiddish." And supposedly Sammy Kahn argues. And it goes back and forth. Finally, a compromise is reached where Sammy Kahn agrees to sit down with his frequent collaborator, another Jewish songwriter named Saul Chaplin, originally Saul Kaplan. The two of them write English lyrics for Buy Me Your Bist Duchesne. Again, not a direct translation. The Andrews Sisters record it. It's released in November 1937 and becomes the biggest selling song in recorded music history up until that date. A hit of absolutely epic proportions. Obviously, that record has been broken many times since, but up until that date, no song in recorded music history sold as much as Buy Me Your Bist Duchesne. So, let me just summarize our story here. It's a wonderful story, wonderful New York story. Sholem Secunda, Yiddish Theater, 2nd Avenue. Johnny and George, Apollo Theater, Harlem. Sammy Kahn, Decca Records, The Andrews Sisters. Seth Keibel, Bethel Congregation of South Hills. Thank you. And of course, one of the benefits of this type of Zoom function is you can all sing along to your heart's content. And the only ones you're going to bother by messing up the lyrics and singing in 12 different keys are the loved ones with whom you're quarantined. All right, real quick, let me just say a couple of things. First of all, thank you. I know it's a Monday afternoon, and I'm floored to see 72 people here. Thank you. I don't know everyone's name, but thank you, Rabbi Alex Greenbaum. Thank you, Bernice Nadelson, Sharon Moskowitz, who first reached out to me, Chris Benton, everyone with the congregation. And, look for me around. My real short, shameless plug is I'm pretty easy to track down. You can go to SethKeibel.com. Shockingly enough, that domain name wasn't taken. You can also find me on the Bookface and the InstaTweet and the UChat and the GramTube and all that stuff. One of the nice things about having an unusual name is I'm very easy to track down. And I've got recordings, I've got CDs out, I'm on Spotify and Apple Music and all that stuff. Please check me out, and who knows, maybe someday I'll even see you in person. Okay, thank you so much. Are there any final questions that I missed that were in the chat box? Did I miss anything, Rabbi Alex?
I think just lots of congratulations and how wonderful it is, and making people cry.
Oh.
Thank you, Seth, and thank you, Seth Keibel. It's amazing. I put your website down in the chat box. Our next First Mondays is sooner than you think. It's like your side view mirror. These things are closer than they appear. You don't have to wait a month. This is a special First Monday in 2 weeks from today. So, and then there's still a February one. So we've got 3 First Mondays in 6 weeks or 4 or 5 weeks. The next First Mondays is January 18th. That's 2 weeks from today. The MLK Day edition. We have special. This is wonderful. A rabbinic student named Shoshana Nambi, who will become Uganda's first female rabbi when she graduates from or gets ordained from HUC. And it's co-sponsored by Men's Club and the Anti-Racism Committee of Bethel. And then in February, we are back on for the first Monday of February, Todd DeBestino. Wonderful as well. March, we've got the Word Mavens. And this is Bethel. We're open 365 days a year, 7 days a week. We're open for holidays where there's not a day that goes by that you can't be with us. It is an honor. I am going to remove Seth's spotlight. I am going to take the spotlight from myself. I am going to thank everyone for being here. I'm going to share that spotlight with Seth, and I am going to release you from your muted worlds. You are now unmutable, and it is wonderful to have you here. I'm going to remove the spotlights. I'm going to gallery view. Okay, remove all spotlights. I'm going to gallery view so I can see everyone, and you can say hello if you want. Don't forget, if you have background noise, we will hear that as well. Seth Keibel, amazing. I was telling Bernice, this is just what we needed. You inspire, you thank you. We need this. All right. So be careful, be safe. And, you're close. It's like a marathon. You can see that finish line. Do not trip. Be safe. All right. Thank you. And Seth, you teach for Osher? Is that what I mean? I mean, like everywhere you teach.
Yeah, I mean, I have a gazillion part-time teaching things. I teach for the Osher programs, which is lifelong learning programs at Johns Hopkins University and Towson University. I'm doing a lot of virtual classes for the Edlovich Jewish Community Center in Washington, D.C., a few different places.
Wonderful. Well,
the trouble with Seth is he's too stiff. He has to get more animated.
Harvey, for a second, I thought you were going to say something like you didn't know we were on. But yes, it's still Harvey. He knows. All right. God bless you, Harvey. And God bless everyone for showing up today. That's 72 squares. I counted about 100 people on. Thank God we didn't have to feed you. So we owe you food and we owe you hugs. And Seth, I know you're going to be back because you are absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.